There is a moment that arrives without warning, not with drama, not with collapse, but in the quiet aftermath of a day when you realize the person you once turned to, the voice that reassured you, the presence that anchored you, is no longer there. And for the first time, you are left standing in a silence that does not answer back. You tell yourself, this is loneliness. A void to be filled, a problem to be solved. But what if the silence is not empty? What if the space left behind by every disappearing hand is not an absence, but a kind of pressure, forcing something buried deep within you to finally rise? Carl Jung once wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, not to become better, not to fix what is broken, but to stand in the full weight of who you actually are, when no one is watching, when no one is approving, when no one is there to soften the blow of your own truth. Most people spend their lives running from this moment. They fill the space with noise, with relationships, with goals borrowed from the expectations of others. But when the support collapses, when the crowd disperses, there is nowhere left to run. And in that stillness, something begins. Something most will never name. This is not a video about being alone. This is a video about what happens when being alone becomes the only mirror left that tells the truth. And if you are in that space right now, standing in the silence, unsure whether you are being abandoned or prepared, then stay with me. Because what awakens in a person when there is no one left to lean on is not weakness. It is the only kind of strength that cannot be taken away. Part 1. The architecture of dependence. Every human being is born into a web. Family, culture, language, expectation. Before you could speak, you were already being shaped by hands other than your own. This is not evil. It is survival. The infant who cannot attach does not survive. The child who cannot mirror the emotions of those around them cannot find safety. We are wired from the very beginning to derive our sense of reality from the eyes of others. But here is what no one tells you. The same wiring that keeps you safe also keeps you asleep. Because when your identity is constantly being reflected back to you by the people around you, you never have to ask the question that Jung believed was the only one that mattered. Who am I when I am not being seen? Think about it. How much of what you want is actually what you want? How many of your goals were chosen because they felt meaningful to you? And how many were chosen because they would earn you recognition, approval, or simply the relief of not being left behind? This is what Jung called the persona, the mask we wear in front of the world. And the mask is not a lie. It is a necessary adaptation. But here is the danger. When the mask is worn long enough, you forget there is a face beneath it. You begin to believe that the version of yourself that performs for others is the only version that exists. And then, one day, the audience disappears. It happens differently for everyone. A relationship ends. A career collapses. A season of life closes, and the people who once filled the rooms of your world move on. And suddenly, you are standing in a silence that offers no reflection. No one is there to tell you who you are. No one is there to validate your choices. No one is there to catch you if you fall. Most people panic at this moment. They scramble to fill the void. New relationships, new distractions, new versions of the old pattern. They mistake the absence of others for a problem to be solved, rather than a question to be answered. But Jung saw something else. He saw that this moment, this terrifying, hollow, disorienting moment, is not a curse. It is the only condition under which a human being can begin to individuate. Individuation is the process of becoming who you actually are, beneath the layers of expectation and adaptation. And here is the hard truth. Individuation cannot happen in a crowd. It cannot happen while you are still being fed a version of yourself by the people around you. It requires a kind of solitude so complete that you are forced to generate your own light. If you are in that space right now, if the silence feels like a verdict rather than a doorway, then understand this. You have not been abandoned. You have been returned to yourself. And what happens next will determine everything. Part 2. The weight you were never meant to carry. There is a reason why the absence of support feels so heavy. It is not simply that you miss the presence of others. It is that for most of your life, other people have been carrying something for you that you did not even know you had outsourced. Think back. When you were uncertain, who told you that you were capable? When you were exhausted, who gave you permission to rest? When you were lost, who handed you the map? We do not realize how much of our emotional regulation is distributed across the people around us. A partner who soothes you when you are anxious. A friend who validates you when you doubt yourself. A parent who believes in you when you have stopped believing in yourself. These relationships are not just connections. They are psychological infrastructure. And when that infrastructure collapses, you are left holding a weight you were never trained to carry alone. Jung observed this phenomenon in almost every patient he treated. People would come to him in crisis, convinced that something was wrong with them, only to discover that they had never developed the capacity to hold themselves. They had spent their entire lives leaning on external structures, and when those structures fell away, they had nothing left to stand on. But here is what Jung also noticed. The collapse of external support is almost always the beginning of genuine psychological development, because for the first time, you are forced to build something internal. Imagine a tree that grows in a dense forest. It is surrounded by other trees, protected from the wind, supported by the network of roots beneath the soil. That tree grows tall, but it grows weak. Its trunk is thin, its roots are shallow, because it has never had to withstand the storm alone. Now imagine a tree that grows in an open field. From the moment it breaks the surface, it is battered by wind, scorched by sun, soaked by rain. That tree grows slowly, but it grows strong. Its roots dig deep. Its trunk thickens, because every single day, it has to hold itself against forces that would otherwise tear it down. You are that tree. The reason you feel the weight so heavily right now is not because you are weak. It is because you are finally standing in the open. And the wind that once would have knocked you over is now the very thing forcing your roots to go deeper. This is the first lesson of walking alone. The weight is not a punishment. It is a pressure that compresses you into something dense enough to withstand what is coming. And what is coming is not disaster. What is coming is the rest of your life, lived from the inside out rather than the outside in. Part 3. The return of the exiled self. When the external world goes quiet, another world begins to speak. Jung believed that the human psyche is not a flat surface. It is a vast, layered landscape. And at the deepest layers, beneath the persona, beneath the adaptations, beneath the stories you tell yourself to sleep at night, there is a part of you that has been waiting. He called this the shadow. Not because it is evil, not because it is dark in the moral sense, but because it is the part of yourself that you have refused to look at. The qualities you suppressed because they were not acceptable. The desires you buried because they were not practical. The rage you swallowed because you were taught that anger was dangerous. The longing you ignored because it did not fit the life you were supposed to live. When you are surrounded by others, the shadow stays hidden. You are too busy performing, too busy adapting, too busy earning the approval that keeps the mask in place. But when the support disappears, when there is no one left to perform for, the exiled parts begin to stir. Have you noticed it? In the silence, do you feel things rising that you cannot quite name? Old wounds that suddenly feel fresh. Impulses that surprise you. A kind of rawness that makes you uncomfortable in your own skin. Most people mistake this for breakdown. They think something is wrong with them. They try to push the feelings back down. to distract themselves, to return to the comfortable numbness of the mask. But Jung would tell you something different. He would tell you that what is rising is not pathology. It is truth. And the reason it feels so uncomfortable is not because it is dangerous, but because you have spent your entire life running from it. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the part of you that was never allowed to live, and it will not be silenced forever. It will wait. It will gather strength in the dark, and when the distractions finally fall away, it will rise, not to destroy you, but to be acknowledged. I want you to consider something that might be difficult to hear. The reason you feel alone is not only because others have left. It is because you have left yourself. And now, in the silence, yourself is returning. Knocking on the door. Asking to be let in. This is the confrontation most people will do anything to avoid. They will start new relationships. They will throw themselves into work. They will scroll through hours of content. Fill every empty moment with noise. Do anything, to avoid sitting in the room with the part of themselves they have locked away. But if you are still here, still listening, still willing to stay in the silence, then you are already doing something most will never have the courage to do. You are facing the exiled self, and that facing, as uncomfortable as it is the beginning of something irreversible. Part 4. The Alchemy of Staying. There is a reason why the ancient alchemists fascinated Jung. They were not merely trying to turn lead into gold. They were describing, in symbolic language, a psychological process, the transformation of base material into something precious. And the first step of that process was always the same: negredo, the blackening. In alchemy, nothing could be transformed without first being broken down. The old form had to dissolve. The structure had to collapse. The material had to enter a state of chaos before it could be reorganized into something new. You are in the negredo. The blackening is not a metaphor for depression, though it can feel that way. It is a description of what happens when the old containers break, when the relationships that once held you no longer hold, when the beliefs that once guided you no longer make sense, when the ground beneath your feet gives way, and you are left standing in the rubble of everything you thought you were. Most people, when they enter the negredo, try to escape. They look for a way out. They search for something to hold on to, something to rebuild with, something to restore the old order. But Jung understood something crucial. The old order cannot be restored. It was not meant to be restored. It was meant to dissolve so that something else could emerge. Think of the seed. When a seed is planted in the ground, it does not immediately become a tree. First, it must die. The outer shell must break open. The structure that protected it must be destroyed. And in that destruction, something that was always latent begins to stir. A shoot reaches toward the light. Roots push into the dark. And what emerges is not the seed improved. It is something entirely new. You are not here to be improved. You are here to be transformed. And transformation requires a kind of death that no one can die for you. This is why the absence of support is not a cruelty. It is a necessity. Because if someone were there to hold you, to comfort you, to tell you that everything would be okay, you might never let the old structure fall. You might cling to the familiar, even as it crumbles. And in that clinging, you would miss the only thing that matters, the emergence of who you actually are. Jung once wrote that the gold is in the dark, not beyond it, not after it, in it. The very thing you are trying to escape is the container of what you are seeking. The loneliness holds the connection. The collapse holds the foundation. The death holds the life. If you are in the negredo right now, if everything feels broken, if the silence is unbearable, if you cannot see a way forward, then understand this. You are not failing. You are dissolving. And dissolution is not the end. It is the precondition. Stay. Just stay. Let the old forms fall. Let the ground break open. Let the dark do its work. Because what is buried in you is not dead. It is waiting. Part 5. The voice that was always speaking. When the noise of the world fades, another sound begins to emerge. It is not loud. It does not demand attention. It whispers. And for most people, it is so unfamiliar that they mistake it for silence. Jung believed that the unconscious is not a void. It is a living presence. It communicates constantly, through dreams, through intuition, through the strange coincidences that seem to carry meaning, through the inexplicable pull toward certain people, certain places, certain paths. But here is the problem. The unconscious speaks softly, and the world speaks loudly. Think about your average day. How much of it is filled with input? Notifications, conversations, media, obligations. The constant hum of other people's voices telling you what to think, what to want, what to fear. In that environment, the unconscious does not stand a chance. It is drowned out before it can even form a sentence. But when the support disappears, when the phone stops ringing, when the invitations stop coming, when the expectations of others no longer dictate your schedule, something shifts. The noise recedes. And in the space that is left, the unconscious begins to speak. Have you noticed it? In the quiet moments, do you feel a kind of pull? Not toward anything specific, but a sense that something is waiting for you, a restlessness that is not anxiety, but a kind of deep knowing that you are supposed to be somewhere else, doing something else, becoming something else. This is the voice of the self, not the ego. The self, the totality of who you are, including all the parts you have never met. And it has been speaking to you your entire life. You just haven't been listening. Jung told a story about a patient who came to him, convinced that he was hopelessly lost. His life made no sense. His direction was unclear. He felt empty, disconnected, adrift. Jung asked him a simple question. What did you love doing as a child, before anyone told you it was impractical? The man sat in silence for a long moment, and then, quietly, he began to speak about something he had not thought about in decades, a passion for drawing, a love of shapes and colors, and the way images could hold meaning. He had abandoned it, of course. He had been told it was childish, impractical, a waste of time. But in that moment, sitting in Jung's office, he realized something. The passion had never left. It had only gone underground, and it had been calling to him ever since. The unconscious does not speak in the language of practicality. It does not care about your resume, or your reputation, or your retirement plan. It speaks in the language of longing. And longing, when it is authentic, is not a distraction from life. It is a compass pointing toward it. If you are alone right now, and if in that aloneness you are beginning to sense something stirring, a memory, a desire, a direction that makes no logical sense, do not dismiss it. Do not explain it away. Do not tell yourself that you are being unrealistic or irresponsible or naive. Ask yourself one question. What is this trying to tell me? The answer may not come immediately. It may not come in words at all. It may come as a feeling, an image, a strange sense of rightness in the middle of uncertainty. But if you stay with it, if you refuse to drown it out again, it will grow, and in time, it will become the only voice that matters. Part 6. The Discipline of Return. There is a moment in every journey alone when the initial disorientation begins to fade. The sharp edges of loss soften. The silence becomes less threatening. And in that space, a new question emerges. Now what? This is the point where most people make a critical mistake. They assume that because the worst is over, the work is done. They relax. They drift. They wait for inspiration to carry them forward. And slowly, imperceptibly, they begin to slip back into the old patterns. Not the external patterns, those are gone, but the internal patterns. The habits of mind that kept them dependent in the first place. Jung understood something that modern self-help culture has largely forgotten. Insight does not change you. Only action changes you. You can understand your shadow, listen to your unconscious, sit in the silence for years, and still remain exactly where you started. Because understanding without application is not transformation. It is entertainment. The difference between those who emerge from solitude stronger and those who remain stuck is not the depth of their insight. It is the consistency of their response to that insight. It is what they do on the days when nothing makes sense, on the days when motivation is absent, on the days when the old pull toward distraction is stronger than the new pull toward presence. Jung called this the discipline of return, not the discipline of perfection, not the discipline of relentless forward motion, but the discipline of simply coming back, over and over again, to the practice, to the path, to the small daily choices that orient you toward your own center. What is the one thing you can do today? Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, but today, that aligns with who you are becoming, rather than who you have been. It does not have to be grand. It does not have to be impressive. It does not have to make sense to anyone else. It only has to be yours. A page written, a walk taken, a boundary set, a truth spoken, a moment of silence observed before the noise of the day begins. The reason this matters is not because each individual action is powerful. It is because each action is a vote for the person you are choosing to become. And over time, those votes accumulate. They build a foundation. They create a momentum that no single failure can undo. I remember reading about a man who spent years rebuilding his life after a catastrophic loss. He lost his business, his marriage, his sense of purpose. For months, he could barely function. But he made one rule for himself. Every day, no matter how he felt, he would make his bed. That was it. Just make the bed. Some days, that was all he could do. But on the days when he made the bed, something shifted. He had done what he said he would do. He had kept a promise to himself. And that small act of integrity created a ripple. It made the next thing possible. And the next. And the next. 5 years later, his life was unrecognizable. Not because he had discovered some secret formula, but because he had learned the discipline of return. He had learned that motivation is not the cause of action. It is the result of it. And that the person who shows up, day after day, in the small things, is the only person who can be trusted with the large ones. Part 7. The strength that does not need witnesses. There comes a point in the journey when something shifts at the deepest level. It is not a dramatic breakthrough. It is not a moment of clarity. It is quieter than that. And yet, it changes everything. You realize, suddenly or gradually, that you no longer need anyone to see you. Think about what that means. For your entire life, you have been performing, not maliciously, not deceptively, but necessarily. You performed for parents who needed you to be a certain kind of child, for teachers who rewarded a certain kind of student, for friends who expected a certain kind of companion, for lovers who wanted a certain kind of partner, for a world that only seems to validate what it can see. And in that performance, you became dependent on witnesses. You needed someone to applaud, someone to acknowledge, someone to reflect back the image you were trying to project. Without witnesses, the performance felt meaningless. Without witnesses, you were not sure you existed at all. But something happens in the long solitude. Something that cannot happen any other way. The witnesses disappear. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, you stop performing. Not because you are trying to be authentic. Not because you have learned some technique of self-acceptance. But because there is no one left to perform for. The stage is empty. The lights are off. And in that darkness, you discover something you never knew was there. You discover that you do not need an audience to exist. Jung wrote that the self is not a social construction. It is not something that emerges in relationship. It is something that is, independent of the gaze of others, independent of recognition or validation or approval. It simply is. And the reason most people never encounter it is not because it is hidden. It is because they are too busy looking in the eyes of others to notice what is standing right in front of them. The strength that emerges from this realization is unlike anything the world can give. It does not fluctuate with opinion. It does not collapse under criticism. It does not depend on being seen, understood, or appreciated. It is simply there. A quiet presence at the center of your being. A foundation that no one can take away. Think of the difference between a building that is held up by external supports and a building that stands on its own foundation. The first looks impressive until the supports are removed. Then it crumbles. The second may not look impressive at all, but it endures, storm after storm, year after year, because what holds it up is not coming from outside, it is coming from within. You are becoming that building, not overnight, not without struggle, but with every day that you stay in the silence, with every moment you refuse to fill the void with distraction, with every choice you make from your own center rather than from the expectations of others. You are laying foundation. And one day, you will realize that you are no longer looking for someone to hold you up, not because you have become cold or independent in the shallow sense, but because you have discovered that you were never meant to be held. You were meant to hold. Part 8. The gift you did not choose. There is a question that haunts every person who walks through the long solitude. A question that returns again and again, often in the darkest moments. Why? Why did this happen? Why did the support disappear? Why did the people leave? Why did the structures collapse? Why me? It is a natural question, a human question, and it deserves an answer. But the answer is not what you think. Jung believed that the psyche has a purpose, not a random purpose, not a cruel purpose, but a purposeful direction toward wholeness, toward completion, toward the full expression of who you are. And sometimes, often that purpose requires the removal of everything that is not you. Think of the sculptor. When a sculptor works with stone, they do not add material. They remove it. They chip away everything that is not the form they are trying to reveal. And in the process, the stone protests. It resists. It seems to be destroyed. But what is actually happening is that something is being freed. You are the stone, and the solitude is the chisel. The people who left, the structures that collapsed, the support that disappeared, these were not accidents. They were removals. They were the sculptor's hand taking away everything that was covering the form that was always meant to emerge. Does that make the process easier? No. Does it take away the pain? Of course not. But it changes the meaning. It transforms the question from why is this happening to me, to what is being revealed through this. And that shift in meaning is everything. Because when you understand that the solitude is not a punishment but a preparation, you stop trying to escape it. You stop looking for ways to fill the void. You stop searching for someone to restore the old order. Instead, you turn toward the silence. You lean into the emptiness. You let the chisel do its work. What if everything you have lost was never meant to stay? What if the only reason it left was to make room for something that could not enter while it was there? This is the hardest truth to accept, and also the most liberating, because it means that nothing has gone wrong. It means that the path you are on, as painful as it is exactly the path you needed to walk. It means that the loneliness is not a sign of being abandoned. It is a sign of being prepared. The gift you did not choose is still a gift. And one day, when you are standing on the other side of this, you will look back and see it. You will see that the silence taught you to listen, that the emptiness taught you to hold yourself, that the solitude taught you who you actually are. And you will be grateful, not for the pain, but for what the pain made possible. Part 9. The quiet that becomes home. There is a stage in the journey that few describe, perhaps because it cannot be described, perhaps because it must be experienced to be understood. The silence stops being frightening. The solitude stops being lonely. The emptiness stops being empty. Something has changed. You have changed. And you only realize it when you notice that you are no longer waiting. For so long you were waiting. Waiting for someone to come. Waiting for something to change. Waiting for the loneliness to end. Waiting for life to begin. Your entire existence was oriented toward a future moment when everything would be different. But now, without announcement, the waiting has stopped. You are here, fully here. Not because you have achieved anything, not because your circumstances have improved, but because you have finally learned to inhabit your own presence. You have made peace with the silence. You have befriended the emptiness. And in that befriending, something remarkable has happened. The solitude has become home. Jung wrote about this. He described it as the discovery of the self, not as an idea, but as a living reality. A center within that does not depend on anything outside. A place you can return to, no matter what is happening in the world. A home that cannot be taken away. Think about what it means to have such a home. It means that you are no longer desperate for relationship. Not because you don't want it, but because you don't need it to survive. It means that you can be with others without losing yourself. It means that you can be alone without feeling abandoned. It means that the approval of the world is nice, but not necessary. It means that criticism hurts, but does not destroy. It means that you are rooted. And rooted things can bend without breaking. This is what the long solitude was always for. Not to make you independent in the sense of isolated, but to make you complete in the sense of whole. To bring you to a place where you can finally say, with honesty and without defiance, I am enough. Not because you are perfect, not because you have figured everything out, not because you no longer need anyone, but because you have discovered that your worth was never conditional. It was never something to be earned. It was never something to be validated by the world. It was always there, waiting. Beneath the masks, beneath the performances, beneath the desperate search for someone to reflect you back to yourself. And now, in the quiet, you have found it. Part 10. The life that waits on the other side. So what happens now? This is the question that arises when the solitude has done its work, when the shadow has been faced, when the silence has become home, when you are no longer running, no longer waiting, no longer desperate. What happens now? The answer is both simple and terrifying. You live. Not the life you were told to live. Not the life you thought you wanted. Not the life that would impress others, or prove something, or fill some void. But the life that is yours. The life that has been waiting for you to become ready to receive it. Jung believed that the goal of human development is not happiness. It is not success. It is not even fulfillment in the conventional sense. The goal is wholeness, the full expression of who you are, in all your complexity, in all your contradiction, in all your unique and unrepeatable particularity. And here is the thing about wholeness. It does not look the same for any two people. The life that waits for you is not the life that waits for anyone else. It cannot be copied. It cannot be predicted. It cannot be achieved by following someone else's map. It can only be lived. You may not know yet what that life looks like. That's okay. You don't need to know. What you need is the capacity to recognize it when it appears. And that capacity is exactly what the solitude has given you. You can now hear the voice that was always speaking. You can now feel the pull that was always there. You can now trust the knowing that was always deeper than your doubts. What is the smallest step you could take today toward that life? Not the biggest, not the most impressive, not the one that would make sense to anyone else. The smallest, the most personal, the one that only you would understand. Take it, and then take another, and another, not because you have a map, not because you know where it leads, but because each step, when it is your step, brings you closer to the person you were always meant to become. The solitude is not the destination, it is the passage, and you have passed through it, not unscathed. No one passes through unscathed, but transformed, made whole in a way that could not have happened any other way. The people who left, the structures that collapsed, the support that disappeared, they were not the end of your story. They were the beginning, the necessary beginning of a life that could only be lived from the inside out. And now, on the other side, that life is waiting. Closing insight. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who you were told to be, not who you tried to be, not who you pretended to be, but who you actually are. Beneath the masks, beneath the adaptations, beneath the desperate need for approval, that privilege is not given. It is earned. And it is earned in the only place where it can be earned. In the solitude. If you are still in that solitude, still walking through the silence, still facing the shadow, still learning to hold yourself, then understand this: you are not failing. You are not lost. You are not behind. You are in the place where real strength is made, the place where foundations are laid, the place where the self is born. And when you emerge, and you will emerge, you will bring with you something that no one who avoided the solitude can ever possess. You will bring yourself, not the version of yourself that was shaped by others, not the version that performed for approval, not the version that needed witnesses to exist, but the version that was always there, waiting, beneath everything. The version that can stand alone, and in standing alone can finally stand with others, not out of need, not out of desperation, but out of choice, out of wholeness, out of the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you are enough. The journey does not end here. It never ends. But something has shifted, something has settled, and as you move forward, into whatever comes next, you move differently. More slowly, more steadily, more fully, because you are no longer searching for what was never lost. You have found it. And it was you all along.